I'm really happy to be here, and I want to thank my friend Amy for asking me to be here and be part of this. So I have done one other storytelling event, but I've never told this story before, and it's a really personal story. So I appreciate your support, and I hope that you open to the lessons that I open to. So it was June 10th, 2010, and I was living in the Bronx with my husband and my daughter, who at the time was 2 years old. And it was a Thursday night, I remember distinctly, and we had just gotten my daughter down to bed, which was very, was actually a good achievement, because for 2 years we couldn't do it. It was really hard. And so we had learned how, and we were happy she's sleeping. And then I noticed that I had a message on my cell phone, and I checked it, and it was my sister. I'm the oldest of 5, and it was my sister Gina, and she said, "Call me back as soon as you can." So I called her right back, and she said, "There's an ambulance outside the yoga studio." So my parents owned a yoga studio for 13 years, and she said, "There's an ambulance outside the yoga studio." Immediately, I thought it was my dad, no offense, because I thought maybe he tripped. I thought maybe something, he, diabetes or something. But no, it was my mom. And I was like, "Mom?" And she said, "Yeah, she blacked out and she threw up, and the EMT is working with her." And I'm like, "Is she conscious?" And she said, "I think so." And at this point, the information was a little muddy, but she said, "Yeah, I think so." So I'm like, and she said, "And I think they were saying something about weakness on one side of her body." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, well, maybe she had a stroke, but maybe it's an episode, like it's small. It's a small thing because she's conscious and she's talking." So Gina's like, "Well, we'll get more information. We're going, they're bringing her to the hospital." So she said, "We'll call you back." So I'm the only one who didn't live in New Jersey at the time, and I felt a little, distant. I was anxious, obviously. I was breathing, taking deep breaths, and also calming myself with the fact that I thought, this is an episode. It's a small thing. She's conscious. So my brother's here. Okay, so about an hour later, I get a call. I can't even look over to this side of the room right now because my family's there. I get a call, and it's my brother Pete. And so this call was I didn't know he was coming. It was a completely different call, completely different than my sister. This call was, he said, "We're at Broadway Hospital, and they're telling us this is a very serious stroke. And she can't be treated here. They need to take her to Robert Wood Johnson in New Brunswick, where they have a stroke unit." And I was like, what? I was in shock and denial, and I remember distinctly saying to him, "Should I come?" And he said, "You should come now." So I got off the phone with him, and I was panicking. I was really freaking out. My husband, Dave, was trying to calm me down. He was like, we're not there. We don't know what's happening. Maybe, we're getting this information filtered through your brother. We need to get there and find out for ourselves. Let's go. So we wake up my daughter. We get in the car, and we drive to New Brunswick. It's about an hour away, and there was no traffic. At this point, it's like 9 o'clock at night. We get there around 10, and we get to the waiting room of the emergency room. My whole family's there. I have a big family. My whole family's there. My grandmother's there, my mom's mom. Her sisters were there. They happened to be around. They were all there. And my dad was in with my mom where she was being taken care of. And they said, "You can go through and go where they are." So I went through in to see my mom and my dad. And I remember that my mom's eyes were closed and she was wincing and a little bit like moving around. So she was in obvious pain. But the one thing that gave me hope was they had put her in a hospital gown, and she was moving the gown over like her hip to cover any of her private parts. I'm like, she's being modest while she's having a stroke. I mean, who does that? So that was crazy. But what made me feel good was she has an awareness about herself and her body at this time. So I felt a little calmed by that. She was admitted into the ICU, and after the neurosurgeon looked at her and evaluated her, he called us all in, my brothers and sisters and my father, and he said, in a very clinical way, your mother is having, and your wife, is having a hemorrhagic stroke. It's in the center of her brain, and we can't operate because it's too dangerous. There's nothing we can do except to wait. As it bleeds, it will stop bleeding on its own, and then we'll assess the damage that's done. And he said, it doesn't look good. So we were like, it was like being hit in the stomach with a bat. Like the wind was knocked out of us. And also, I hated that guy. I'm sorry. I hated that guy. I was so angry. Not just with what he was saying, it was like the way he was saying it. You know, it was very clinical. And I was like, but this is so personal. But I didn't just hate him. I got really angry. So I appreciate Austin's story because he was like, why not me? You know, but at the time I was like, why the F her? Why her? It's, you know, I was like, this person who's so loving, who does everything for everybody else, that's what her life has been. How could this happen? And so I was holding in a lot of anger. And in fact, one time my husband was just asking me a question and I answered him, like I snapped at him. And he was like, are you angry at me? And I was like, no, I'm not angry at you. I was like, how? I was angry that he asked me if I was angry at him. And I realized that I was angry at the universe. I was just angry. Along the way, so my mom was in ICU for 2 weeks. Along the way, this anger started being healed by a variety of things. One thing was that my family was like team heal. We were like, we lived in the waiting room of the ICU. They hated us. They were like, oh my God, these people, get them out. We were there for each other and we were there for my mom. We supported each other. It was an amazing thing, and I will rent them out to you because they are amazing. My family's amazing if you need them. So that was like, that did soften my heart. I knew that I was supported. There were other things, like little signs. When I was in the room with my mom one day, and they were on the ICU was on the 4th floor. There was a butterfly outside her window when I was like in with her, and I was like watching this butterfly float outside the 4th floor window, which made no sense to me. And I was just soothed by it. I thought, this is a sign everything's going to be okay. There was also this beautiful patch of not violets, of lavender at the hospital. And I would walk by that patch of lavender every day because we stayed at a hotel near the hospital. I'd walk by before I saw her, and I would breathe in this lavender, and my whole body was soothed, my mind was soothed, and again I thought, this is a sign, everything's going to be okay. But the thing that really surprised me, or the things, were the next few events that I'm going to share. So one day we're all in the waiting room, and there's a little kitchen, you know, they have kitchens right there, and there was a coffee maker in there that was broken. So it was broken. And so we would bring a box of Joe. We would bring a box of Joe because we were like living there. We were there, and we would sleep there. We'd sleep there. So we had a box of Joe and sometimes donuts. And one day we're in there, and this woman comes from the other side of the waiting room, and you hear her go in the kitchen, and you hear her say, the coffee maker's broken. So my sister-in-law sweetly says, oh, you could have some of our coffee. Have some of our coffee. No problem. So you hear a lady pouring coffee. She's making the coffee. And then you hear her say, it's cold. And my sister-in-law, so sweet, she says, well, you could just, warm it up in the microwave, and then you'll have hot coffee, right? So you hear her, she's making the coffee, she puts it in the microwave, time goes by, and then she gets it, and she walks by us to the other side. And, we've been all like praying, we're like holding hands, it's somber time. And my dad, quietly, in his best Steve Martin, all of a sudden says, well, excuse me. And we all started cracking up. We all started laughing. And I was like, just the laughter in that moment started chipping away at my heart. Another time my dad was in the room with my mom, and he was standing up next to her bed, and he was touching her. She was unconscious. They put you in a coma to let your brain heal too. And he went to go sit down, and he tripped over something, and he sat back down in his chair. And then he heard, boop, boop, boop. And then you heard, getting faster, and a nurse runs into the room. She plugs something in, looks at my mom, and then she looks at my dad, and she says, Mr. Ferraro, I have bad news and I have good news. The bad news is you unplugged your wife's respirator. The good news is we learned she can breathe on her own. You can't write this stuff. You can't. I was like, this comedy and tragedy was something I didn't expect. And again, my heart was like just breaking up. And I was opening to the moment where joy is, in the moment. Not in the past, how could this happen? Not in the future, what's going to happen? And then my final part of this story, of one that we love to retell. After the hospital, which was about a month, my mom was in her first rehab, which is it's a place for really serious brain injuries. You're on a respirator, you're on the feeding tube. And people are also, sometimes they're like got a net over their bed. This is a serious, it's called the Brain Injury Unit at JFK. So we were there a lot. My dad was there every day by her side. And then one day he wants to go out and get something to eat in the cafe in the hospital. And he goes to get off, to leave that floor, and this nurse says, sir, where are you going? And he's like, oh, I'm just gonna go get something to eat. And she said, sir, you can't leave. And he was like, I'll be right back. I'm just gonna go get something to eat and come right back. And she was like, sir, go back to your room and go in your bed. And he was like, I'm not a patient. I'm here for my wife. And she was so embarrassed. She was so embarrassed. And he was like, no, it's okay. But, she thought he was a patient in the brain trauma unit. Just saying. But it really woke me up to the fact that laughter and joy is available to us, even in the most traumatic situations. And that if we're here in the moment, we can be open to it. And there's a beautiful quote I want to tell you from Hafez, who's a Sufi poet, and it's the end of his poem called Laughter. And it says, oh, what is laughter, Hafez? What is this precious love and laughter budding in our hearts? It is the glorious sound of a soul waking up. Thank you.